There have been significant developments in Crimea, Putin's prized possession. The defense of Crimea, which had been the most important base of the Russian Navy for months, even years, has fallen. Military intelligence reports indicate that Russian defenses suffered a severe blow after a large-scale operation by Ukraine-supporting partisans in the region. Despite the attacks, the Crimean Bridge, which connects Crimea to Russian territory, has also been hit by these assaults. Although the Russians made extensive efforts to stop the attacks on the Crimean Bridge, their defensive line completely collapsed after the recent events. What's even more striking is that Ukraine didn't even have to lift a finger. So what caused the collapse of the Crimean Bridge's defense? Before getting into the event, it's important to note that Ukraine nearly completely destroyed Russia's strategic naval power in Crimea. This was confirmed by Ukrainian Navy spokesperson Dmytro Pletenchuk, and clear signs of a significant turning point have emerged. With the previous attacks and the beginning of the withdrawal of the Russian Black Sea Fleet from Crimea, the first signs of a new era emerged, while the ongoing attacks also demonstrated that the fleet was experiencing a strategic collapse. As Russia gradually lost its dominance in the Black Sea, it began struggling to defend the maritime routes in the region. In fact, thanks to Ukraine's unmanned surface vehicles, the Russian Navy lost 18 warships in just 18 months. At this point, by the end of 2024, Russia had no choice but to abandon Crimea to preserve its Black Sea Fleet. These unmanned vehicles developed by Ukraine not only inflicted physical military damage, but also succeeded in shaking Russia's security and logistical lines in the region, as well as its economy. As you know, as a result of the attacks, some of the most expensive military assets of an army were damaged. Due to the production cost of a warship being tens of millions of dollars, the Russian Navy is forced to compensate for the losses. Additionally, as a result of Ukraine's maritime operations, Russia's security barriers were breached, reaching critical transportation hubs. With the situation as it was, the Moscow administration drew maritime barriers to strengthen the defense of Crimea. However, no matter what the Moscow administration did, the withdrawal of the Black Sea Fleet from the region caused the entire area to become completely defenseless. However, Ukraine didn't only put Russia in a difficult position from the sea, but also from the land. The Crimean Bridge, being one of Russia's primary transportation hubs, was constantly under threat. As Ukraine increased its pressure on the bridge, the Russians deployed their most important systems around the bridge to defend it. In the Kerch Strait, the Russians also set up short-range air defense systems in areas close to the bridge. Russia's desire to protect the bridge became even more apparent as Ukraine intensified its pressure in Crimea. As the Russian military presence in Crimea began to collapse, Ukraine started launching more precise attacks. With Ukraine's maritime attacks, Russian defense lines were breached, and as a result, important logistical connections of the Russian army were disrupted. With the recent events, it wouldn't be wrong to say that a major attack on Crimea is imminent. In the event of an attack that leads to the destruction of the Kerch Bridge, it could become nearly impossible for Russia to reach Crimea. The Kerch Bridge is not only a military crossing, but also the primary route for Russia to carry out logistical shipments to Crimea by land. The bridge was of critical importance for supplying Russian forces in the region. However, the vulnerability of the bridge and its failure under Ukraine's maritime operations would prevent Russia from reinforcing Crimea via land. Once considered a strong base, Crimea would face a significant weakening of Russia's defense strategy if supplies had to be delivered via sea and land connections were cut off. In such a scenario, the Russian administration in Crimea could be forced to abandon the region entirely. Ukraine's preparations for a new attack at this point pose a serious threat to Russia and could quickly change the course of the conflict in the region. The vulnerability of Crimea presents a major opportunity for Ukraine, and this opportunity could mean regaining control of Crimea in a very short time. After a storm in Crimea, it was revealed that the entire defensive line Russia set up to protect the bridge had collapsed. This means that the once strong defense line the Russians claimed to be unbreachable suddenly collapsed overnight after the natural event. As a result of this, the defense of the sea section of the bridge has become surmountable. In the near future, Ukraine could use this weakness to launch an attack, which could paralyze the Moscow administration's efforts in Crimea. The Crimean Bridge, Putin's prized possession, is more vulnerable than ever. The collapse of the bridge's defense after the storm could mark a significant turning point. The effects of cold weather are becoming apparent across various regions of Ukraine. Although some northern and eastern front areas experienced snowfall in the previous week, most regions currently have minimal precipitation. However, snowfall is anticipated in the area in December. It is noteworthy that snow on the front lines often serves as an indicator of the conflict's trajectory. Since the war's inception, Russian forces have been endeavoring to gain control, particularly in eastern Ukraine. Their current focus is on Donetsk. Even the final Ukrainian stronghold in southern Donbass continues to withstand intense Russian military offensives. This area has evolved from a mere front line to the epicenter of a historically significant conflict. As Russian tanks encounter difficulties with Ukrainian terrain in their attempts to advance, the airspace has become the most critical battleground in the region. Both sides are conducting airstrikes to support the tactical progress of infantry units. Consequently, mechanized units are playing a diminished role on the front lines. While the Russian Federation concentrates its efforts on the Donetsk region, it is simultaneously engaged in a significant conflict to defend its borders in the Kursk region. For the first time since World War II, the Kremlin is experiencing territorial losses and continues to explore novel strategies to mitigate this situation. According to open-source intelligence reports, in addition to foreign mercenaries, new military units are being deployed to the area. Moreover, North Korean military personnel have officially commenced operations in the Kursk region. However, reports indicate that these North Korean forces have encountered substantial resistance from Ukrainian forces. In September of this year, Moscow initiated another significant offensive campaign. During these operations, a noteworthy intelligence report from open sources came to light. These sources indicated that Russian forces experienced substantial casualties in their efforts to gain ground, with losses reaching unprecedented levels in recent history. Independent observers noted that Russian fatalities on the battlefront peaked in October, marking the highest monthly death toll to date. In response to this situation, the Kremlin has been employing all available resources to secure territorial gains. Reports indicate that since September, Russian military forces have acquired control over more than 1,100 square kilometers in Ukraine's southeast. This territorial gain suggests that Russian troops, previously in a state of stalemate, have commenced making progress. Despite the elapse of over 1,000 days, Russia has not yet attained its long-standing objective of controlling Ukraine's Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Analysts posit that the recent advances made by Russian forces on the battlefield will result in significant challenges as winter approaches. Although territory has been gained, Russian supply lines are becoming increasingly vulnerable. Recently, Russian logistics have been severely impacted by Ukrainian drone attacks, and with the onset of winter, scenarios similar to those of the previous year may potentially recur. As winter approaches, both factions have consistently targeted supply centers and logistical routes along the front lines. These attacks have necessitated the withdrawal of units lacking provisions. Currently, the Russian forces, already experiencing difficulties in the Kursk area, face significant challenges in maintaining logistics across extensive territories. The multiplicity of supply lines indicates that any disruption could precipitate substantial complications, potentially exacerbating the situation in a cascading manner. While the leadership in Moscow appears to be focusing predominantly on the Eastern Front, they confront a more pressing challenge in the Kursk region. Following the Ukrainian military's offensive initiated in August of this year, Russian elite units, originally designated for the primary front lines, were urgently redeployed to Kursk. Consequently, Russia's primary assault groups have been redirected to the Kursk area instead of proceeding to their intended destinations. Consequently, numerous forecasts suggested that by safeguarding this region, the Ukrainian military could attract additional troops to the area. At present, Ukrainian forces in the area are mounting a robust defense against 50,000 combatants, including a substantial number of mercenaries, Russian and North Korean soldiers. Notably, Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region continue to make progress in certain areas and even reclaim previously lost positions. The Ukrainians have achieved a significant strategic advantage with their most recent offensive by depleting the Russian forces advancing toward the primary front. North Korean troops, who have commenced direct engagement in frontline combat, are operating with a force of 10,000 in the Kursk region. These units have initiated participation in close-quarters combat, and open-source intelligence indicates that they might enable Russian forces in the area to return to their main fronts. This presents a significant challenge for the Moscow administration, as the involvement of additional foreign troops could increase the complexity of controlling the region. Furthermore, reports suggest that Ukrainian military personnel in the region possess Korean language manuals, introducing an additional layer of complexity to the already intricate situation. Given that Russian and Ukrainian forces are experiencing difficulties in distinguishing one another, the presence of foreign combatants further exacerbates the issue. Should Ukraine successfully employ deception tactics by communicating in Korean, it could potentially lead to significant confusion at the front lines. Such a strategic maneuver has the potential to substantially alter the course of the conflict,